In the Bible, we read about various miracles performed by Jesus that are beyond explanation. For example, the Bible recounts an incident where Jesus healed a blind man by spitting on the ground, mixing it with soil, and putting it on the man's eyes. When a woman touched Jesus' cloak, her blood disease was immediately healed, and Jesus felt power exiting his body when the woman touched. Not only that, but Jesus stopped a storm in the Sea of Galilee, shocking his disciples. But these are not his only miracles. The Bible is filled with supernatural phenomena and miracles performed by Jesus Christ, leaving readers astonished. It's because, on one side, we see Jesus as a human who faced difficulties and was crucified. However, while performing miracles, we see a different Jesus, who is authoritative and holds supernatural power. So, what are more miracles performed by Jesus, and what do they tell us about him? Welcome to a new episode of Uncovering Untold Stories, a channel where we talk about the secret and hidden historical stories, events, and incidents of the past that find their roots in either religious or history books. It's a place where you will hear the most unorthodox and hard-to-believe stories that have been forgotten but are part of history, shaping our lives to this day. In this episode, we will tell you about the miracles performed by Jesus and what these miracles make Jesus, probably a magician. Let's get started. Jesus had been teaching a large crowd in a remote area near the Sea of Galilee. As the evening drew near, the disciples realized the people would need food. They suggested sending everyone to nearby villages to buy food, knowing it would be nearly impossible to feed such a large group with the limited resources on hand, just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish provided by a young boy. Facing this challenge, Jesus took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, lifted them to heaven, blessed them, and then broke the bread. He gave the pieces to his disciples to distribute among the crowd. Incredibly, everyone ate their fill, and there was even an abundance left over. 12 baskets full of leftovers were collected after everyone had eaten. This miracle highlights Jesus' divine power and compassion, showing his ability to provide abundantly from very little. It symbolizes not just physical nourishment, but also spiritual satisfaction for his followers, demonstrating his care for their needs beyond immediate sustenance. One rational explanation for this miracle comes from R.B. Chamberlain, a professor of world religion and cultural anthropology at Eastern Florida State College. In his 2012 book, The Miracles of Christ, Chamberlain suggests that there may have been about 8,000 people present, including women and children, and he suggests that the 5 barley loaves and 2 fish mentioned in the story were actually shared among the people, prompting those who had brought their own food to share as well. This collective act of sharing, initiated by Jesus and his disciples, resulted in everyone having enough to eat with leftovers to spare. Another miracle is the healing of the high priest's servant in Gethsemane. This event is described in all 4 Gospels. John provides the most detailed account. After Jesus had finished praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, a place where he often sought solitude for prayer, a group arrived to arrest him. This assembly included Roman soldiers and Jewish officials, among whom was a servant of the high priest named Malchus. During the arrest, as Jesus was being seized, one of his disciples, identified as Simon Peter, reacted impulsively. He drew his sword and struck the high priest's servant Malchus, slicing off his ear. This action was likely a spontaneous and defensive response to the sudden and tense situation unfolding before them. In a remarkable display of compassion and divine power amidst the chaos, Jesus immediately intervened. He rebuked the violence and then, astonishingly, reached out to touch the injured servant's ear. According to the Gospel of Luke, Jesus miraculously healed Malchus, restoring his ear. Luke is the only evangelist who mentions Jesus healing the ear after it was cut. This detail could have been included to emphasize Jesus' forgiving nature. However, some scholars, like Chamberlain, argue that the miracle may not have been as miraculous as it seems. The Greek text uses a diminutive form of the word for ear, suggesting it was only a small part of the ear, possibly the earlobe, that was cut. Jesus might have simply pressed the wound to stop the bleeding, which Luke then interpreted as a miraculous healing. Then comes the story of Jesus walking on water, which is mentioned in 3 Gospels: Mark, Matthew, and John. After Jesus had miraculously fed 5,000 people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, he sent his disciples ahead of him in a boat while he dismissed the crowd and retreated into the hills to pray alone. Later that night, the disciples found themselves in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, battling against strong winds and waves. In the darkness, they were startled by the sight of what appeared to be a figure walking towards them on the water. Initially mistaking it for a ghost, Jesus quickly reassured them, calling out, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." Peter, always eager and bold, asked Jesus to invite him to come out onto the water. Jesus granted Peter's request, instructing him to step out of the boat and walk towards him on the water. Peter bravely obeyed, but as he became aware of the fierce wind, fear crept in, causing him to falter and begin to sink. He cried out to Jesus for rescue, and without hesitation, Jesus reached out his hand and caught Peter. Upon entering the boat together, the wind immediately calmed. Overwhelmed by what they had witnessed and experienced, the disciples worshipped Jesus, acknowledging, "Truly you are the Son of God." This miraculous event not only demonstrated Jesus' authority over nature, but also served as a profound lesson in faith and trust. However, there are other interpretations as well. Scholars have debated the geographical and contextual details of this story. Tradition holds that the feeding of the 5,000 took place in Tabgha near Capernaum on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. If the disciples were sailing from this location, they would not have been in the middle of the lake, as Mark suggests. Archaeological research has shown traces of a pier extending into the lake at Capernaum. At the time, the lake was shallower, and the pier might have been just below the water's surface. Jesus could have walked on this pier, giving the impression to the disciples who were battling a storm and darkness that he was walking on water. Another miracle is the fish's catch. The New Testament highlights 2 remarkable fishing episodes involving Peter, where a miraculous catch of fish follows a night of unsuccessful labor. These events are uniquely documented in 2 separate Gospels, Luke and John. In Luke's account, Jesus is standing by the Lake of Gennesaret, surrounded by a crowd eager to hear his teachings. He notices 2 boats at the water's edge, left by fishermen who are washing their nets. Jesus climbs into Simon's boat and asks him to push out a little from the shore. From there, he teaches the people. After finishing his sermon, Jesus instructs Simon to cast the nets into deep water. Despite their earlier futile efforts, Simon obeys. They catch so many fish that their nets begin to tear. They signal for help from their partners, and both boats are filled to the point of sinking. Overwhelmed, Simon Peter falls to Jesus' knees, acknowledging his sinful nature. Astonished by the catch, Simon and his companions, including James and John, sons of Zebedee, hear Jesus declare that they will now fish for people. They leave everything behind to follow him. John's version occurs after the resurrection by the Sea of Galilee. Simon Peter, along with Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples, decide to go fishing. Despite fishing all night, they catch nothing. At dawn, Jesus, unrecognized by the disciples, calls from the shore, asking if they have caught any fish. When they respond negatively, he instructs them to cast the net on the right side of the boat. They obey and catch a multitude of fish. The disciples whom Jesus loved identify him, prompting Simon Peter to jump into the water to reach Jesus, while the others bring the overloaded net to shore. Upon landing, they find a fire with fish and bread already prepared. Chamberlain's book offers further insight. Chamberlain suggests the event likely occurred near Capernaum or Tabgha, known for its fish-rich waters due to several springs feeding into the lake. The disciples, facing land to avoid the sun's glare, would have struggled to see fish, while Jesus, standing on a promontory, could easily spot a school of fish just below the surface. However, it's a weak argument because it's not possible that all fish were on one side and that Jesus could see through the water to make an observation of where the fish were. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos about Little Heard and untold real historical stories. Let's continue now. Then comes the miracle of the resurrection of Lazarus. Arriving at Lazarus's tomb, a cave sealed with a stone, Jesus commands the stone's removal. Despite Martha's protest about the stench of a 4-day-old corpse, Jesus insists, reminding her of his promise that belief would reveal God's glory. After a prayer of thanks to God, Jesus calls Lazarus out of the tomb. Lazarus emerges, still bound in burial cloth, and Jesus instructs them to free him. However, Chamberlain says that Jesus knew Lazarus's symptoms of diabetes, anticipating a diabetic coma, not death. Knowing a comatose person's blood sugar levels would drop without food, Jesus delayed, expecting Lazarus to wake after 4 days, aligning with the timeline of Lazarus emerging from the tomb. However, this interpretation is hard to believe because for this to happen, the timing of everything had to be planned well. What's more, the New Testament is filled with accounts of Jesus performing numerous healings and even resurrections. Jesus and his disciples reached Bethsaida, a town nestled near the shores of the Sea of Galilee. In this bustling community, a group of concerned locals approached Jesus, leading a blind man to him with fervent pleas for healing. The miracle unfolded in stages, showcasing Jesus' distinctive approach to healing. Initially, Jesus took the blind man by the hand and guided him out of the village. Instead of immediately restoring his sight, Jesus performed an unconventional act, spitting on the man's eyes and laying his hands on him. This tactile gesture underscored Jesus' method of healing through personal contact and symbolic action. The healing process continued gradually as Jesus asked the man about his vision. At first, the man reported seeing people who appeared like trees walking around, a sign that his sight had begun to improve but was not yet fully restored. Undeterred, Jesus proceeded with another significant touch. He placed his hands on the man's eyes once more. This time, the miraculous power of Jesus brought about a complete transformation. The man's vision was miraculously restored. No longer hindered by blindness, he could now see clearly, experiencing a profound moment of healing and newfound sight. However, there are some explanations behind this miracle. Understanding this healing requires acknowledging the superstitions of the time, particularly the belief in curses like the evil eye. Such curses could supposedly cause various ailments, including blindness. People were often so convinced of these curses' power that they developed physical symptoms through self-suggestion, known as psychosomatic illness. Chamberlain suggests this may have been the case here. Jesus, aware of the man's belief in the curse, used spit and touch, recognized methods against such curses, to lift the man's self-imposed blindness. When the first attempt didn't fully work, Jesus repeated the process, resulting in the man's restored sight. Then comes the miracle of the healing of a leper. In this remarkable miracle, a man suffering from leprosy approaches Jesus with a heartfelt plea for healing. Leprosy is a disease that damages nerves, respiratory tract, eyes, and skin. Lepers in that time were shunned and ostracized due to the fear of contagion, forced to announce their presence and keep a distance from others to prevent spreading the disease. Approaching Jesus in desperate hope, the leper kneels before him, expressing his belief that Jesus has the power to heal him if only he is willing. This act of humility and faith sets the stage for a profound encounter. Jesus, deeply moved by compassion, does something extraordinary. He reaches out and touches the leper. This gesture carries immense significance because touching a leper was strictly forbidden under Jewish law due to the risk of ritual impurity. With a commanding voice filled with authority and compassion, Jesus pronounces healing over the leper, declaring, "Be clean." Instantly, the man's skin condition vanishes, and he is completely restored to health. This miraculous transformation not only physically heals the leper, but also restores his dignity and social standing. Following the healing, Jesus gives the man specific instructions. He instructs him to go and show himself to the priest, adhering to the religious protocols prescribed in the law of Moses. By doing so, the healed leper would be officially declared clean and allowed to reintegrate into society, free from the stigma and isolation that had marked his life. Another miracle is turning water into wine. The miracle occurs during a wedding celebration in the village of Cana in Galilee, where Jesus, his disciples, and his mother Mary were all among the invited guests. In Jewish tradition, weddings were elaborate affairs lasting several days, and the availability of wine was crucial for the festivities. Running out of wine would have been embarrassing, potentially tarnishing the reputation of the bridegroom and dampening the joy of the occasion. Mary, ever observant and compassionate, noticed the predicament and turned to Jesus for assistance. Despite initially hesitating, Jesus responded to his mother's concern. Mary instructed the servants to follow Jesus' lead and do whatever he asked of them. Jesus directed the servants to fill 6 large stone jars, typically used for Jewish purification rituals, with water. Each jar could hold between 20 to 30 gallons. Following Jesus' instructions, the servants filled the jars to the brim. After filling the jars, Jesus instructed the servants to draw some of the water and present it to the master of the banquet. When the master tasted the liquid that had miraculously been transformed into wine, he was astonished at its exceptional quality. He remarked that it was the finest wine, saved for the later part of the celebration, a testament to its richness and flavor. So, do all these miracles suggest Jesus was a magician? Traditional Christian interpretation holds that Jesus' miracles were not just historical events but crucial demonstrations of his divinity and his dual nature as both God and man. His acts of healing the sick, raising the dead, and performing extraordinary feats were seen as evidence of his unique role in salvation history, illustrating compassion and love in his mission to restore humanity spiritually and physically. Jesus' miracles were closely tied to his teachings, each miracle conveying profound spiritual truths. For example, when Jesus healed the 10 lepers, he emphasized the role of faith, declaring, "Your faith has saved you." The miracle of walking on water similarly taught a lesson in faith, illustrating how Peter's doubt led to his faltering. Authors like Pentecost and Danielson interpret these miracles as intentional acts to deepen the disciples' trust in Jesus amid challenges. In contrast, liberal Christianity places less emphasis on the miraculous aspects of Jesus' life, focusing more on his ethical teachings and moral example. From thinkers like Erasmus onwards, liberal Christians sought to separate Jesus' humane teachings from perceived superstitions and supernatural elements, elevating him as a moral guide rather than a figure of miracles. This movement aimed to promote his teachings as foundational for a global civilization free from antiquated religious practices. Contemporary liberal Christians often interpret Jesus' miracles metaphorically, viewing them as symbolic narratives conveying deeper spiritual truths rather than literal historical events. This approach reflects a broader trend toward integrating religious teachings with modern scientific and philosophical perspectives. From a non-religious standpoint, philosophers such as David Hume cast doubt on the validity of miracles, suggesting that claims of supernatural events should be viewed skeptically due to potential self-deception. Historians like Will Durant proposed that Jesus' miracles might be explained by psychological suggestion and cultural expectations rather than supernatural intervention. What do you think? What do the miracles in the Bible tell about Jesus? Isn't it true that these miracles prove Jesus was more powerful than any other being on earth, being the Son of God, but he sacrificed himself for humanity? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on what miracles Jesus could perform to avoid his crucifixion, but chose not to. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on stories that might sound controversial, mysterious, and shocking, but are real and have roots in religious and history books. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.